We were already counting, Keith.
Okay. Oh, okay.
But yeah, if you want to get started, we can
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started.
Start recording.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started with this quarter's ITSB meeting. Thank you all for participating. At the moment, we don't have a quorum, but we don't have anything that really requires any type of a vote or anything along those lines. So we'll just acknowledge the fact that we don't have a quorum at the moment, but we do expect others to continue to join in. If and when we do get a quorum, maybe someone can just put that in the chat or just annotate that we have a quorum. Again, just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. So again, just keep that in the back of your minds. And then Julie is going to be gracious enough to run through our slides. She already has the agenda up there. So we've gone through the call to order. I'll go ahead and take an opportunity here to just make some comments and opening statements before we get to the heart of our material. So again, as you all know, this week the governor released his recommended budget to the General Assembly. Director Walker, who's going to be joining us midway through this program or this session, but as you can imagine, it's a busy time of the year for her and her team. I'll talk about specifics as to what it means for Department of Information Technology a little bit later. But one of the things earlier this week as well that occurred in addition to the governor's recommended budget was the governor's signing of Executive Order 278, which was the value of experience in state government hiring executive order. And what this does in many ways is that it recognizes that while formal education is extremely important, we don't want to minimize that in any way, shape, or fashion. We don't necessarily need to have degrees, especially as we continue forward with technology in many cases all the time to gain entry into employment and to begin to have a meaningful and worthwhile career. And so we're very happy the fact that the governor has proceeded with this executive order. Makes it very clear that the state's recognizing the value of work experience as well. And we don't want the lack of higher education being an inhibiting factor. But to be clear, we also want to be able to encourage higher education. And while we're sustaining individuals with a worthwhile and valued career, they can go on, get their higher degrees. And then if they elect to move on away from state government work, so be it. But then at least we're getting a few years of service from these individuals back to the state. So that's a win for us all around, especially when you look at cybersecurity. I know we talked a lot about the lack of talent from a cybersecurity pipeline aspect. And I'll talk a little bit here about Montreat and CCN in a little bit, but we're really trying to look at ways that we can even begin to tap back into the high school kids and start getting some of our high school seniors into internship programs or associate programs here at the agency as a way of getting them some exposure to what we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective and across IT as well. And, again, they're probably not going to get that kind of a summer job anywhere else. These internships and associate programs will lead to full-time employment. And again, with the executive order in place, we're able to do that in a sustainable way and allow the individual to continue to progress in a career if they so elect, and support them if they choose to go ahead and do the path of higher education. So we're very helpful about that. So again, it's just another way of us trying to attract talent and folks. As you know, I think Director Walker said earlier this week, the overall vacancy rate in the state right now is at 23%. We hover between 14 and 18% as an agency. And there are agencies right now with certain functions that are sitting above 30%. So we do have a workforce challenge here in the state. Interestingly enough, as I've talked to a number of private sector CIOs, they also are seeing the workforce challenge. So this is not just unique to public sector, it's transcending the technology industry. Interestingly enough, despite the layoffs that have occurred in the IT sector, we're not seeing those folks gravitating to public sector. I think what we're seeing is more of contractor work, more joining of boutique or smaller firms. That's giving them a little bit more flexibility, allowing them to be more innovative perhaps in the creative use of their time and allowing them much more work-life balance. So we'll remains to be seen what happens down the road. Speaking of executive orders, since last time we were together, Governor Cooper back on January 12th did sign Executive Order 276, which was the high-risk application ban. So the most prominent applications mentioned in that was TikTok and WeChat. I just saw in a cyber thread update that the United Kingdom just issued a government ban of TikTok. I know there were some other conversations where I think a similar function might be coming. Not that the federal government has already not done some things in the Biden administration, but now there's a discussion, I believe, I have not read it yet, about a TikTok ban across the U.S. in general. So we'll see what that materializes. I bring this up because Senator Moffitt has put forward Senate Bill 83, which is a high-risk application ban that codifies or legislates these bans, makes it applicable not only to the executive branch, but also the legislative and judicial branch as well. I know some of our colleagues at the higher education side may or may not have some concerns with that as it relates to, I know talking with some folks at NC State, TikTok is a way of gaining campus sentiment, especially in the unfortunate events that have occurred there at NC State over this past academic year. So there might be some more adjustments or amendments. I do believe there was an amendment to allow for higher ed for outside research purposes. I'm not sure if that kind of solves that use case in particular. But nonetheless, that bill is going through, and I just want to make everyone aware of that. We were talking about Carolina Cyber Network a little bit. So Tori, myself, and Carly Sherrod had the opportunity to go out to Montreat College this year and get to visit with them. And Fayetteville Tech Community College President Mark Sorrells, or I should say Dr. Sorrells, joined us as well. We got to see a lot of the great work that's going on across the CCN network, and in particular how Montreat's approaching the instruction and education across cyber. Interestingly enough, they have a traditional 4-year degree program, and they also have an accelerated accreditation certification program. And their student body right now is basically 50-50 split between the two. So, you know, we got to engage with the students. They allowed us into the classrooms. In fact, I think Carly basically taught the incident response class for the one classroom we were in. Students were very excited, had a lot of questions. Interestingly enough, though, what was disappointing to me, and I say that, you know, tongue in cheek a little bit, a lot of the students were questioning about the need for 5 years work experience as it relates to the federal government. And I'm kind of like, come to the state. We will allow you to get that work experience. And if you choose to go work for the federal government, I understand, or private sector, but we're not going to sit there and be so restrictive and saying you must have this, this, and this. We'll come and engage us as you're coming out of college or coming out of your certification programs, and we can give you a very meaningful, worthwhile, and paying job. And then you can elect to do what you want to do when you have the experience to go elsewhere. So interesting about that. Speaking of staffing changes, Carly Sherrod, who's our interim enterprise state chief risk officer, today is her last day with the agency. She has accepted an exciting opportunity in the private sector. And so we are in the process right now. So that puts us down our top 2 cyber positions here in the state. We are currently in the final round interviews for our basically our state chief information security officer. And we're also going to be looking for a deputy state chief risk or information security officer as well. And so we'll keep you all apprised of that as we move forward. Legislative hearings so far, both Nate and Tori were invited over by Representative Johnson as chair of the IT House Appropriations Committee. And they presented on the great grants, and Nate will cover that in much more detail with all of you. So you have the latest and greatest, and there's some, I can't even begin to tell you the maps and the great work that our GIS team has been doing down to the granular detail level that we can now see. It's pretty phenomenal. So I'm juiced, if you will, to have that conversation and hear Nate give you guys an update on that. And then Tori also spoke about IT procurement, as well as there was particular interest on the cybersecurity pilot that has been in legislation since I think 2018. Tori, I know Tori was on here, but before I came on board. Believe it or not, it's taken us a long time to get that for a various amount of reasons, but that pilot has now been awarded. AT&T is the awarded vendor, and we're just waiting to finalize some things, and then we're going to go ahead and get that operationalized. The last thing I'll do is just real quick, as a reminder, on March 29th, Representative Johnson is hosting NC Tech Association Day. So NC Tech has invited me to come along and speak a little bit about the state of IT here at the state government. So again, encourage you all, if you get an opportunity, either to listen to it, watch it, or attend in person. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be a pretty good time. With that, Cherie, I'll turn it over to you for some updates on privacy, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So Julie, could you pull up the slides for me, please? The next slide, let's start with, yeah, there we go. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do is, since I haven't spoken to this group since December, is to talk a little bit about what the background is, what the plan was, and where we've gone from here. So I started in December of 2021, and that makes me, having been here in service about 15 months. So I've taken a holistic approach to risk management for privacy and data protection. And I've looked at it through the lens of where we need to go, and then also where can I go as a party of one, right? So we've got some good news, some support from the governor for future positions, but as with it just being me, I have to look at not only what do I want for us, but also what can be achieved now. So some of the things that we've rolled out that many of you may be aware of and we'll take a look at is we have now a website that gives information about privacy and data protection for the state. It gives guidance. It gives most of our laws. I'm sure there's always some missing, and I'm always open to people to recommend to me things that should be added to that. But in addition to that, we're providing services to our agencies, including privacy guidance and consultation, privacy-related reviews for MOAs, for contracts, for privacy policies from third parties. So, should we get into this? Do you see any issues with what they plan to do with our data? What sort of changes do we need to make? I also provide privacy incident response guidance and breach support, privacy federal alignment support. So sometimes some of our agencies may have a situation where they've interpreted federal privacy requirements a certain way and then find out that they're maybe not in compliance. How can we get on track with that? And my experience in federal government helps me to have a better understanding of what's the best approach for that. I also do, I provide help with privacy and data protection maturity assistance. And one of the things that I'm planning to roll out and I'm excited about is data breach exercise support, because I consider those to be quite fun. So that's what we're doing now. But I have been asked before, had I done a gap analysis? And because the program is new, I've done gap analysis at the federal level, or analyses, I should say, at the federal level for different programs to look at their maturity or to look where they have shortfalls. But because we haven't had an existing program, to do that sort of an analysis didn't quite make sense. So what I've done is look at it from a strategic perspective of where do we want to go? What are the main areas that I see for us to do? Because what I'd like to do at the state level, which I always saw as a fault at the federal level, is I'd like to have privacy be integrated in, right? So that we're across the board lockstep, instead of what I see happening oftentimes at the federal level, where we have one privacy program, we have a security program, and they're pointing to each other as what everybody needs to be doing, and they aren't doing that. So my goal with policies has been to work very closely with ESRMO and to work with our HR and others to try to integrate privacy into our existing policies. So I've done that with some of the HR stuff. Some of that's still coming. We're working on revising and updating our media protection policy, our data classification and handling to be more representative of this. And then also one of the things that we are looking to do with our data classification and handling is to make it more user friendly. So part of what I did when I studied information science was to look at at usability studies, like how are people actually using the information that we're giving them. And most people are going to be scanning that document quickly to figure out the answer. So I want to flip the script, and I've found a model from Harvard that I really like that's sort of like a 2-pager. And I'd like to kind of switch it to be more like that. So I'm working with ESRMO and other stakeholders for that. Then also assessments. This is an area where we need to be moving, and we need to be integrating something that meets the business needs. And we have some stuff now, but we're working towards making it more user friendly so that we'll have our PTA that then leads to the PIA. So you have your, I won't speak in code, your privacy threshold analysis, which I always say is like that first step. So when we're taking a first look at something that might be using personally identifiable information, we're like, here's what we see at this moment. And then if it's a complex issue, then our next step is to move on to the privacy impact assessment, which is how will this impact us overall? Like once we have all the facts on this thing that we're wanting to do, what is that actually going to look like if we integrate it? What are the risks? So we want to get that. Then we've also determined that there's a need for a social media PTA. So we rolled out like a draft one of those and went through that so that we can look at if we want to use social media, what are the risks with that? And I think we can see with TikTok and the like, that's a handy thing to have, and that's for agencies. So let me be clear that when I talk about this, I'm not talking about DIT doing everybody's social media PTAs. No, we have privacy points of contact in our agencies, and this is tools for them to be able to help assess the risk at their level. We're here for support, obviously, and guidance if you need it. But what the goal is to equip people in the agencies with the tools that they need to make these decisions and to be able to make them quickly. The other thing that I'm also considering rolling out, which I personally have had great affection for at the federal level, is a decommissioning PTA. This came about because we had systems that went offline. We didn't know what we did with the data. I won't say who it was, but we didn't know what happened with the data because nobody asked for any of this information for like 3 years. After 3 years, like the people who worked that thing are gone. We're not sure where we put that information. Is it in a format that you can pull it up if people want to know what information do you have on me from that system? All of this. So I think for all of those reasons, even if it's even just rarely used, that one's worth doing. Then I'm also looking at, working with ESRMO on how can we have a comprehensive assessment tool that's more secure, that provides us with a dashboard that helps us to work more closely together because we're both sides of risk. Then also I'm super excited to say that we've got training that's rolled out, right? So training rolled out in February. It just came to a close. I am super excited about that. I'll be talking to you in the next couple of slides about what exactly is covered in that, but it's a lot of really good basic training, and it is privacy training that is focused on what you would need to know about at work, but also things for the home as well, because it's a holistic approach. And then one of the other things is that I'm super excited that I have gotten, I'm still interviewing, but I have an intern. Was there a question? Nope, I think somebody's dialing it. Okay, so one of the things that I'm very excited about is this summer I've got a summer intern. I'm doing the interviewing for that to do role-based training and to make it more customized training for our people. So to integrate the specific laws of North Carolina to make it more relevant and to make it more understandable. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the other things that we're doing is operational privacy, right? So sometimes this term is not something that people have heard before, but operational privacy is we can look at what the law says and we can put it in a policy and we can say, you should do X in order to comply with this privacy law. But the way that privacy is operationalized can sometimes be different. So what I learned at the federal level from 12 years doing that is that if you're not careful about how you actually put this into place, you can say whatever you want, but the person who's actually going to take the actions to make it happen needs to have specific guidance. It needs to be a point by point sort of a thing, and it needs to not be complicated. And you can't do those sorts of things that we easily do, or many of us do, and I won't call anybody out, but I used to do this too. Whereas a lawyer, you point to a framework and you go, here's the source of authority for this and figure it out, right? the person who's going to do the implementation a lot of times is a technical person who is time strapped and doesn't have the time, the energy, or the desire to reach out and read your framework and understand it. They want to know, what do I do? Points 1 through 10. And so that's a lot of what operational privacy is about. And then it's also about integrating the technical and administrative controls. So this is where privacy and security work together to make that happen, to make the magic happen. Then also privacy awareness. One of the things that I know about privacy is that I can't get people to comply if they've never even heard of it. And if we haven't had a privacy program before, well, then I need to be out, I need to be talking to people, I need to be engaging with the stakeholders and doing things like having data privacy week. So I've done that as well. And that's coming up on another slide. I think that I have lost the slides. Are y'all still seeing the slides?
Sorry, I think I touched
No, I think
something.
we might have hit technical difficulty there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I can keep going. So I'm trying not to, I know that I've already made this quite a long discussion. It's hard for me because I am so passionate about privacy. I could talk about this for forever, but I'm trying to keep it moving. So so one of the other things is that since this is a strategy board, I thought I would finally bring up and talk about the things that everybody in the office is like, yeah, we've heard this a million times. That is, what is the strategy for me? So what am I looking at to figure out where we need to go with it and how should we move forward? So several different things that I'm looking at. We've incorporated the fair information. Well, we adopted the fair information practice principles in May of 2022 for the state. But I'm also looking at strategy documents from the federal government, right? They've rolled out their privacy programs like 20 plus years ago. They've had a chance to mature them. They have boards that work on this. And can we go back one more slide? Or going back one more? Yeah, there we go. So a strategy. So OMB Circular A130 is, let me see what it's actually called. Yeah, so OMB Circular A130 is managing information as a strategic resource. So it provides a holistic approach to what should privacy be doing, what should security be doing, what should we do with architecture, you name it, right? It's supported by the federal CIOs, it's supported by privacy, data, all of that. So I'm using that as a model because that has been metrics for me for over a decade of what to do, right? To match look at what would be a holistic approach. In 2020, they came out with the federal data strategy. Now, I'm not saying that we adopt the federal models a whole cloth, no. But what I'm saying is I think these are great foundations for us to customize them to meet the needs of North Carolina. We can at least look at what other people have done to be successful and use that as a model rather than start just on our own, right? Why should I reinvent the wheel if there is a wheel, even if it's not necessarily the one I'm going to take? Then I've also, because my background is in information science, I'm also a big proponent of information governance. And this has come up in the federal realm as well in the past number of years. And information governance gives us closer alignment. So if we're thinking about it, information governance is here. It's the alignment of our policies and SOPs and all of that. And it's alignment between our different business units. Then as we go down, it's got data governance, it's got IT, it's got legal, it's got all of that. So that's the other piece of it that we're looking at, is to bring everyone into closer alignment so that our information management, our business units, our IT, privacy, legal, compliance, risk assessment, all of that, we're all working together. We all have situational awareness of things that we need to know that impacts sensitive data. Okay, and then next slide. Okay, so then the other areas that I am looking to beef up and models that I've looked at that I think are very cool is for incident response. So we have an incident response plan and I'm happy for that. But now that there's a privacy office, I want to have something that is able to integrate privacy better into that. And OMB M1712 is a model for how to respond to breaches that involve PII. So they talk about like who needs to be set up in teams, right? Like what kind of teams for different types of incidents that may occur, so that you already have playbooks ready to go of what you will do in the event of an incident. So if we have this type of incident, we might need to talk to these people. It would be the head of this agency. It would be this person. It would be the CISO. It would be whatever. And we have an idea of where we want to go with things quickly so that we don't lose time in the event. And then the other thing with that is that it tells everybody what we're doing, so nobody is left out and nobody is confused, and we know how to come to the table quickly to make these decisions. So I love it for all of those reasons. It is a very dry read if you do pick it up. Then FIPS, we've adopted the FIPS for the state, but also, and that's a link to our version of the FIPS, but the FIPS have been around for ages. Two of the sections of the FIPS, the Fair Information Practice Principles, that I am looking to improve on is greater transparency and notice. So more notice at intake of what we're doing. And then I'm thinking about whether or not we can do a model that's similar to the feds, where we provide more in-depth system notices to let people know where their data is in the state and what we're doing with it. Then finally, data inventory is on our list because this is a CIO requirement. This is an important thing for us to have. We need to have better control of our data. It's not that we don't already have some data inventories, but it's that we want to have this comprehensive bird's eye view with dashboards and everything else so that we can more closely figure out where our data is. We know when there's data movement, where there's data movement that there shouldn't be. This will help us with security. This will help us from a privacy perspective. And it will also help us to have better understanding of what sort of data we have that we could use as that strategic resource. So to give us a more informed decision making. Okay, and next slide. So I'm not going to go into all of this, but this briefly is the release plan for the privacy components that we have, the privacy training. So in February, we released privacy modules on data privacy basics, what is PII and how do we protect it. Then in April, we have keeping personal information private, privacy and security, and it explains how privacy and security work together, right? We have that overlap with data protection, and we have to work together in order to make the state safe and secure. Then there's FIPS, because I think there's never a bad time to have FIPS, and I think that there's not as much knowledge about how those things are actually applied. So June starts with the Fair Information Practice Principles and different principles like data minimization and accountability, purpose specification, to help people to understand how to integrate those into their daily workflows. And then next slide, please. Okay, then in August, we have privacy and third-party partners, data accuracy and quality. This is a lot focused on, like, in our procurements and all sorts of things like that, things that we should be on the lookout for, things that we should be looking at that maybe the partners that we're working with are saying or doing that we need to have better control over or to focus more attention on as it relates to privacy and data protection. Then there's privacy by design. This is where you put privacy in early in so that we're there. So we're building like a firm foundation that has privacy and data protection so that everything that you do on top of that, you know, you have that firm foundation and it's not going to crumble. You can just keep building up. So it's great for a number of different reasons. Plus, I also love privacy by design because it helps us to be in early where we can help to shape people's ideas and give them insight into what could be sticking points. And then that way they can build something that works for them that's also compliant. And then that way there's not that crushing of the dreams, which I felt like was a lot of what I did at the federal level, where by the time it gets to me, I have to say, "Ooh, here's this thing that it's not going to work." And I hate to see people devote hours and money and hopes to that, and then it can't work out. And I think there's a way that privacy can be that champion to help you with it. So that's what that's about. Then also, we can't be without privacy in social media, right? Because with TikTok and everything else, people are asking like, "Hey, why can't I use this? I don't understand it. I don't understand what my kids are doing with social media." So we have a component on that privacy in social media. And that wraps up what we will have for the year of training, unless, of course, our intern helps me to put some additional fantastic things in there. And then next slide. Okay, so I also did Data Privacy Week, which was in January, and I went out trying to increase privacy awareness. So I spoke at NC PACE's Cybersecurity Symposium on privacy and data protection. We had a data privacy lunch and learn, which was for DIT and across the state. And then I also provided links for other things that were super interesting. Like for me, World Bank had a Data Privacy Week presentation that went over all kinds of things, including how to keep stuff safe with your money, all that kind of stuff. So that was really interesting. I spoke at UNC Center on Technology and Policy. We did a Data Privacy Week deeper dive with our General Counsel, Jonathan Shaw, and also the CIO for OSHR. And that was fun and interesting, and I think helped people to understand more about what we do and where we're going and what we also want to do. I also did a privacy presentation for the governor's office to talk about that. And then I also did a blog, and there's a link to the blog for TikTok risks and advice. And next slide. Okay, so then this is, and I'm going to wrap this up really quickly. I just wanted to show you what our website looks like. So for anybody who maybe hasn't been out to see it, we have a privacy website. It offers information on privacy laws, both federal and state, policies, guidance, and you can see the different things running across the top. And next slide. Here's a breakdown of what you would see. So like for federal law, some of the things that flow to us at the state level is going to be things like the Privacy Act of 1974, HIPAA, FERPA. So you're seeing all of that. Plus we have the different things that apply at state policy and memoranda. So the adoption of the FIPS, our media protection policy, our adoption of the NIST risk management framework, those sorts of things, our data classification and handling policy. Then we also have guidance at the bottom. So what we've incorporated into our policies are these standards from NIST, and here are those NIST standards. So the one that's not yet incorporated into policy, which I am hopeful of doing in the future, is that bottom one, the NIST privacy framework. That's been out for just about a year now, maybe 2 years. And it's a great one. It's complementary to the cybersecurity framework, and it helps us to give a holistic view. And then next slide. Okay, then you can see a little bit closer what specific laws we have. So this is a great resource if you're interested in privacy at the state and you're wondering like where to go. This might be a good first place to go. And then you can see here on the side, we have different things to help with privacy complaints, to direct them to the Attorney General's office or to the FTC or the FCC, depending on what it is. We have a discussion about why privacy matters. We have business resources. We have a contact, so you can contact the privacy office if you have questions. And then again, since I think the fair information practice principles, which are the foundation of privacy, are so important, they have their own link as well. And next slide. That wraps it up. So I know I've put out a lot there, but I know that some of you have not heard me speak before, and I just wanted to level set of what the office has been working on since I started and where we're planning to go. Can I answer any questions? I know I'm like a fire hose. I try to hold it back. I don't know what to do.
So I'll jump in, Cherie. I was remiss earlier when I was talking about some updates. So House Bill 196, which is our agency's omnibus bill, if you go out and look at it, it's been updated now. You will see two significant creations in there. One is the Office of Cybersecurity and Resiliency, Office of Cybersecurity and Resiliency. We are basically elevating the role of cyber, just from not having it embedded in our statute, kind of getting away from the ESRMO logo, and we're actually going to call it Cybersecurity and Resiliency. The other thing that we've done is we've also created, and corresponding to that, have now drafted language for the creation of the Office of Privacy and Data Protection, which is Cherie's part of the organization as well. And if you go out there and read them, you'll see how much there's integration and cross-linkage between the two and how much they need to work hand in hand as we go through things. But not every data breach originates from a cyber incident. So there are some situations where they're not joined at the hip, but for a lot of things, they are integrated and joined at the hip accordingly. So just excited about that. And then House Bill 197 is out there as well. Those are basically some broadband technical corrections. We're very pleased that Representative Johnson has agreed to sponsor both those bills. And we look forward to their moving forward, hopefully here in the legislative session. So with that, we'll turn it over now to get an update on broadband. And Nate, I don't know if you were on earlier when I was talking about some information from CNN, why we need more broadband and faster broadband because of the data lag from the games. Streaming is 67 seconds behind real-time play. Cable's only 28 seconds behind. So you're going to go solve that for us here in North Carolina. So Nate, our awesome Deputy Secretary for Broadband and Digital Equity, go for it, Nate.
I didn't have any prepared comments about gaming this morning. I'm sorry, but I can give a bit of a project update for everyone on where we stand on implementing the governor's plan for closing the digital divide in North Carolina. So last time I was here, I walked you through the progress we'd made in the GREAT Grant program. We'd awarded 95 grants in 93 counties, about $273 million to connect 113,000 households and businesses across the state. Really a broad range of impact for this program to this point. And we were flying last year. We really expedited our consideration, scoring, protest, and award processes to get resources out the door as quickly as possible. Late last year, in the October-November range, though, we ran into an issue with the federal government. We've been waiting on clarifications from our federal colleagues about the uniform guidance captured at 2 CFR 200. If Julie could skip forward to the next slide, please. I'll come back to the specifics on the guidance. There we go. This is just this map is designed to show you kind of all the locations where we have made award across the state, the locations that will be served because of these GREAT Grant awards. So you can see the spread. There are a handful of counties that don't have awards because there either wasn't an applicant because coverage is pretty strong already, or because a county decided to go on its own way and use its American Rescue Plan funds outside of the context of the GREAT Grant program, which by statute precludes it from participating in the GREAT Grant program or the upcoming Completing Access to Broadband program. You know, I mentioned Secretary Weaver often points out that the number of households that we're connecting here is tremendous. But where you really see a force multiplier effect is the businesses, the local businesses that will have high-speed internet connection, and the impact that those connected businesses can have in their community in terms of additional economic development. I should also mention, on top of the $270 million that we awarded, we have attracted nearly $150 million in private internet provider commitments as a part of that grant program. I see a hand up. What's that?
Yeah, hi.
Hey, Tracy.
It's Tracy Fusey. I just was trying to figure out, Nate, how I compare and rationalize the awarded locations, 113,000, households served, roughly 10,000. Just trying to figure out what awarded locations are all the green dots. And then does that mean, like, on average, there's only one household served per green dot? Or I know that can't be right, but I'm just trying to square it up in my mind.
Yeah, the green dots are the 113,000 awarded locations across the state. That includes 109, nearly 110,000 households and just about 4,000 businesses. That's the full sum total right there. Does that make sense?
Sorry. So yeah. So is it actually the case that we have roughly a 1-to-1 awarded location to served location, be it household or business? Again, I'm just trying to understand what the intent is, right? In terms of how many grants go out and then how many things would get served by those downstream? Sorry if this is a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I must have phrased something unclearly. The Great Grant Program is intended to address unserved households and businesses across the state.
At the individual level,
No, the grant goes to an internet provider
right?
that proposes a project area addressing unserved locations across a county, right? So we have 95 awards, right, to 16, I think, different internet providers across the state.
Got it.
Each of those 95 projects includes somewhere between a couple of hundred to 2,500 locations that it proposes to serve. Applications are scored on, among other criteria, how many locations they propose to serve, what percentage of a given county's unserved locations they propose to address, and so on. Of our 95 awards, internet providers that are receiving those awards will address the 113,000 green dot locations here across the state. I think the important point, are we good?
Yeah, I'm
On that?
sorry.
Okay.
I track back over.
No. I wasn't clear, so I'm glad you pushed me to clarify. The important thing, a couple of other observations that I'll make about this slide. One, our cost per location, of course, continues to increase, right? The further we reach into rural, unserved, harder to connect locations, the more that number is going to creep up, right? We intend to make additional awards in the coming months. And as we do, I expect those cost figures per location to keep creeping north. Now, I think in the Completing Access to Broadband program, some of those numbers may come back down because unlike the Great Grant program, the Completing Access to Broadband program includes underserved locations, those locations that may have some internet service but don't have 100 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second upload speeds. That means we're going to have providers, in some cases, using grant funds to upgrade old copper networks, for example, right? And where that infrastructure already exists, I think you'll see some of the cost per location come back down, but we'll see how the data bears that out. The other point that I'll make here is that we're just getting started, right? That we have an additional, I think probably about $140 million that we'll put out through the Great Grant program. And then, of course, the $400 million that we've got for the Completing Access to Broadband program, other programs that are funded by the American Rescue Plan funds. And then we of course are preparing to bring down additional funds from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law's BEAD program. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Next slide, please, Julie. This was the schedule that I briefed, I think, last time we were here. Again, our goal in these Great Grant programs, you'll see we did a series of phased awards, rolling awards rather, over last summer. We made our last couple of awards in mid-September. We intended to have all the contracting, the grant agreements executed between mid-October and January. And that's where we've run into our problems with the federal government. So all of this has been bumped back, and we're now I'd say a third of the way through the purple contract work and agreement executed segment now. So I'll talk about why that is. Next slide. So the uniform guidance, my new favorite subject. The 2 CFR 200 governs how federal funds are received by recipients and passed through to subrecipients and other entities, non-federal entities. It includes a number of restrictions on how we use our funds and how we perform compliance and monitoring of those recipients. A lot of that comes down to a question of whether our fund recipients are contractors or subrecipients. In the American Rescue Plan funds, we're working with U.S. Treasury. Those are administered by U.S. Treasury. So U.S. Treasury is responsible for implementing and sharing the impacts of the uniform guidance for this program. And that guidance includes a number of restrictions that don't make sense in North Carolina's public-private partnership model for high-speed internet infrastructure deployment. A couple of examples of these. any income generated by a project funded by these ARPA funds has to go back into the project itself, right? That doesn't make any sense in a high-speed internet infrastructure project for a couple of reasons. One, we know that revenues generated by internet subscription fees fund additional infrastructure deployment at other locations, which we want to keep doing. Two, by the time a project is completed and generating income, there's nothing to put money back into, right, for that given project, right? There's already fiber and the relative speeds you need in place when that project is complete. Secondly, it requires those subrecipients to follow federal procurement standards, which as an alumni of a federal procurement agency, I will say nobody who doesn't have to do wants to do. And then third, any property disposed of by the any property that is funded by the federal funds and then disposed of could revert back to the federal government. And if you're talking about North Carolina's internet providers, say one of our rural co-ops or Charter, AT&T, Windstream, the other major providers, the idea that the federal government could claw back the actual fiber they've deployed is an existential risk for those providers. We identified several layers of risk with the impacts of that program, including local county attorney concerns about how they can enforce some of the compliance requirements, confusion at the local level, the potential, of course, for audit risk where we fail to mesh the impacts of this guidance with our own grant agreements and our expectations of our providers. And so in November, we began aggressively advocating with the federal government, including directly from Governor Cooper to U.S. Treasury, Office of Management Budget, Commerce, and the White House, that U.S. Treasury exempt or allow states to exempt internet providers executing broadband infrastructure projects from these requirements in order to, one, keep counties in the project structure in the Great Grant Stream, and to make sure that our internet providers don't have an incentive not to participate in the program. We have been assured now that updated guidance is coming. They, in fact, will clarify that a state may determine whether a given recipient of funds is a subrecipient or a contractor, and in either case, these specific restrictions will not apply to internet providers receiving these funds. We understand that the federal government is finalizing that draft now, but they've told us where they're going with the guidance and given us, I think, the opportunity to pick back up executing our grant agreements and moving those as quickly as possible. I see another hand, but I can't see who has raised it.
Nate, it's State Auditor Beth Wood.
Auditor Wood, how are you?
Good, thank you. I would just say that I would love to have a sidebar with you. I don't understand the compliance requirements the same way you do. I think the like putting your money back into a program is really program specific.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a non-federal agency recipient does not have to use, I was thinking, and this has been my area of expertise for a number of years, is that the procurement, you have to follow the state's procurement rules, not the federal rules. So I just, again, I have not delved into this as deep as you have, but the 200 CFR is what we do every year. And
Mhm.
so we are pretty proficient in that arena. I would just love to save you a lot of the bureaucratic stuff of trying to get answers out of the federal government. I would love for you to schedule some time to speak with myself and my federal grant auditor staff and maybe be able to work through some of this stuff faster.
Yes, ma'am. Auditor Wood, happy to do that. And I will have Renee Habersetzer on our team reach out to your office today to get that scheduled.
And make sure that I'm a part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, the good news is that both the White House and U.S. Treasury have assured us that the updated clarification is coming. We expect this actually to be published by U.S. Treasury in a matter of days, not weeks at this point. Again, we need to see it on paper, right? But we are expediting our grant agreement process as much as possible now. Next slide, please. We had, of the 95 awards to this point, 17 of them are two-party agreements, meaning that the county did not participate as a partner in that program. And we were able to send those out to providers on March 7th. We've already gotten, I believe, 10 of the 15. 2 we had to hold back because we're waiting additional information from providers. But of the 15 that we sent out, I think we've already gotten 10 or 11 of them back signed, and work can start on those projects immediately. So we're very excited to finally be back, getting back on schedule here. 78 of the grant agreements were three-party grant agreements, meaning that the county is chipping in either its general funds or ARPA funds, or contributing infrastructure, for example, a water tower or an easement, some other asset owned by the county to make the project work. We hope to have these grant agreements out the door to counties and internet providers to sign concurrently starting April 4th, meaning that by May 4th, these grant agreements should be signed, allowing the 2-year project construction phase to begin as well. I should mention the three-party grant agreement is a new innovation for our team. Counties as partner have to document their partnership agreement or arrangement with the internet provider. But we heard so much confusion at the county level about the impact of federal compliance and monitoring expectations that we have created this three-party agreement in order to clarify roles and responsibilities. Our goal here, particularly with the private sector risk management partner that we're bringing in to help us with compliance efforts, is to do everybody's homework and hand it to them and say, look, this will have everything you need to satisfy your own U.S. Treasury compliance requirements here, and our books are open for your purposes. So again, the goal is to just simplify things for the counties that in many cases are strapped for capacity here. And so we want to get these projects up and running as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. With that progress on the GREAT grant, once those awards are fully executed in May and work has started, we can remove awarding locations from our outstanding applications and rescore the remaining. I think we had about 305 applications total. About 280 of those were eligible for consideration. We've awarded about 95 of them. So we have about 185 that are still eligible for consideration. And our goal is to use every available dollar to award and address additional unserved locations statewide. We've got about $77 million available in ARPA, state fiscal recovery funds, about $60 million in state appropriations to the State Capital Infrastructure Fund available to the GREAT grant program. And we're going to throw all of that at every existing application, again, to knock out as many of these unserved locations as possible, and then have the opportunity to launch the Completing Access to Broadband program, which of course is our direct partnership with counties to use DIT's existing procurement tools to address remaining unserved and underserved locations. In April, we will begin the process of pre-qualifying internet providers in each county so that we can do a county mapping and scoping effort with each participating county, and then award scopes of work against those pre-qualified internet providers. So the actual scope of work process should begin once GREAT grants are done, looking at probably June. And again, we're focusing on the procurement side of the problem right now. We also should have draft program guidance available for public feedback in April for the new broadband pole replacement program. That's the $100 million fund available for reimbursing communication providers to upgrade utility poles in service of a broadband infrastructure project. Next slide, please. This is, oh, there we go. That's what I was, the less helpful map first. I've spoken here a little bit about the challenges of the FCC mapping process. Of course, the FCC treats any served location in a given census block as determining the entire census block to be served, resulting in a dramatically understated scope of the problem here in North Carolina. And I think this slide, these two slides are a great example of that. Our mapping team in the Broadband Infrastructure Office and at DIT's Center for Geospatial Analysis in GDAC have done incredible work delivering us to the point we've wanted to be for years, where we can really show at the location level whether a household or a business is unserved, underserved, or fully served. Next slide, please. This is a result of our new maps and the FCC's new mapping effort, right? A much more realistic portrayal of where the problem is. Again, the level of the red areas here are unserved locations, and you'll see that that number jumped from, I think, go back one slide, please. From 70,000 unserved and 125,000 underserved locations back up to 200 plus thousand of each, right? The yellow areas are underserved, again, meaning they've got some service, but not what we need to be able to fully participate in the modern economy. And so if you go to the next slide, you can start to see what we're going to be able to bring to the table in terms of county mapping. The hex bins below, kind of in the bottom left, you can see the color key here. The darker pink a bin is, the higher the count of unserved locations in that bin. And the darker blue, the higher the percentage of locations in that bin that are unserved. The result being the darker shades of purple are where we need to do the most work, right? To really start addressing this problem and building projects. As I've told this board before, the GREAT Grant program has been highly effective, but internet providers come to us with a project already baked, right? And we score it on its merits against statutorily prescribed criteria. It doesn't leave any room for the state or the county government to drive the needs, right? So if you go to the next slide, I can show you how this plays out in a given county. I think we've got Caswell County here. Green dots are still locations that the GREAT Grant program is serving. The kind of diagonal hash is where we know of other federal broadband infrastructure projects. Of course, we aren't going to duplicate efforts. We don't want to send state money anywhere federal money is already going, but we will focus our completing access to broadband projects in these purple and blue locations here across the county, and use that to inform the scope of work we're developing for completing access to broadband procurements, right? And see what providers are willing to step up into addressing those areas. So again, we're really excited about the mapping work. I know the mapping team was able to show off some of this progress at the GIS conference last week. We spend a lot of time talking to our other state partners and the federal government about their mapping efforts. And I'm pleased to report that thanks to our partnership with the GDAC and the geospatial team there, no state is producing the level of mapping, detailed mapping that we are right now, enabling us to plan better broadband infrastructure projects. So this really represents a major step forward in our planning efforts. Next slide, please. Just a couple of other items that I'll mention here. As we dealt with that delay from the federal government, work has continued. We're still getting a lot done. We have brought down about $177 million of North Carolina's $273 million allocation from the Capital Projects Fund at U.S. Treasury that will go into the Completing Access to Broadband and Stopgap Solutions programs. We have been awarded $5 million for BEAD planning. BEAD is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program administered by U.S. Commerce, National Telecommunication and Information Administration. That program will be it's a $42 billion pot that's apportioned to states on a formula basis based on the number and percentage of unserved locations remaining of the nationwide share. We saw new estimates this week that have North Carolina bringing down as much as $1.4 billion from the BEAD program to make sure every North Carolinian is served with high-speed internet. I don't think it's going to be quite that high. I think we're probably aiming in the $1 to $1.1 billion range, but we shall see soon. But we've brought down $5 million for planning. Emily Ganji on my team, she's the policy director for the broadband and for the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity, is guiding our federal planning efforts there, working with both the Broadband Infrastructure Office and the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy on their digital equity planning to bring down as much federal funding as possible to address this problem. We are eagerly awaiting news from NTIA on the Middle Mile competitive grant program, $1 billion pot. The state did not apply directly, but we worked to support a handful of in-state private sector or nonprofit applicants for those funds. And then we continue to focus on raising awareness of the Affordable Connectivity Program. We're up to more than 690,000 enrollees in North Carolina. We believe that the number of eligible households is closer to 1.3 million. So we've still got a lot of work to do. We're about fourth nationally in terms of percentage of eligible population enrolled. And just this week, we're awarded a grant from the FCC for $500,000 to do more of an awareness campaign around that program. So still a great deal of work to do, but wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of where things stand. We've got an incredible team working very hard day to day on addressing this problem, from the infrastructure access to affordability, availability of a device, and training and skills needed to fully compete in today's economy. And that's kind of the holistic view of the program of the problem that we're trying to address. So we really appreciate this board's support and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
So I know Tracy has a question. We also have a question in the chat then. So go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, first I wanted to give you guys a shout out. Amazing graphics and really fantastic that you're going to be able to use and unleash the data to really pinpoint and get to the source of the challenges. So if I'm at the macro elevator level, right, elevator speech kind of level or pitch, we've got about 500,000 homes in North Carolina at the individual level, homes and businesses that we would classify as unserved and underserved. Maybe roughly 50% of each. The great grant funds and other things you are deploying will get at about 20% of that, a little over 100,000, right? Maybe edging up toward a quarter of that. Do I have that right, Nate?
The great grant funds focused just on unserved locations will take out about a quarter of that with what we've already awarded, additional funds to come. So eventually, between the American Rescue Plan funds directed at both the Great Grant and Completing Access to Broadband program and the BEAD funding that we're pulling down from the feds, we will be able to address this problem at the infrastructure availability level across the state for every location.
The end game that we're headed toward is that through the state funds and the federal funds, we will drive those numbers to zero in terms of the infrastructure to get there. Then there's the question of whether the households subscribe or not. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, and Tracy, just remember our outline metrics that the governor has put out for us is, again, 80% connectivity across all racial subdivisions, 100% connectivity in households with school-age children. So we're also going to be looking, as we start getting these awards in place, as these connectivities are starting to occur, we want to start augmenting the data set more now so we can start reporting out on how we advancing the needle, if you will, in those categories to show that we're making a tremendous difference here in North Carolina.
Got it. So down the road, we'll see things that show, households with children as another way we can drill in and see those maps, or demographics in other ways for the service to household. Really fantastic stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add also, I mean, the data that we're really looking at, I mean, this is the ecosystem that's in North Carolina. A lot of great work occurs at the local level that feeds data sets into NC1 map, which is used by the 911 community. We're leveraging those data sets as the basis here for the broadband mapping exercise. Our GIS team is awesome. They're pulling all this stuff together, and it's a continuous feed. I mean, they're getting monthly updates on that, and so it's just the way the process should work, and very proud here of what we've been able to accomplish so far in North Carolina. Nate, there's also a question in the chat. Is the GIS information open and accessible to third parties so they can overlay with their infrastructure or plans?
Yes, all of it is on NC1 map. And I don't know if Crystal Dickerson or anyone else with a link handy is still on. If not, when I'm done here, I'll put a link into the chat to the broadband maps in NC1 map to share that information. Now, some of the hex bin.
Matt already from our GIS team is already. He's listening in and he's posted out there in the chat.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate that. Now, I think some of the hex bin information showing the proportion of locations in a specific area that may not be online yet, but all of that will be available in the near future. But the link that Matt just posted already has the locations that we've served and the analysis at the county level of kind of where the federal investments are and where our investments are and where we see unserved data across the state. Other questions? Well, thank you all for the opportunity to give you an update.
Nate.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Great job by the team, Nate. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll go ahead and continue to move forward here with some committee reports. So if you were a late joiner, you may not have heard Rocco today is not able to join us. Exciting day in his family. His son is, today's the day where they match to hospitals. So they are sitting in an auditorium somewhere awaiting to see what happens. So he sends his regrets, but he will listen in on the recording. But I do want to thank Rocco for being such a persuasive vice chair, because both our committee chairs and our ITSB subcommittees at December kind of said, hey, we're ready to move on, do something a little bit differently. So both Jeff and Tracy graciously served for a year as chair of those subcommittees and wanted to continue participating, but did not want to be the chair. So Rocco did what Rocco really does real well, and he was very persuasive. And we got Keith Warner to step in as our ITSB Cyber Committee chair. And then Joe Abernathy is going to take over as chair for the digital transformation work. Now, Joe couldn't be here today as well. So Tracy, you can exit anytime you want, but you can never leave, whatever the saying goes for the Hotel California. So we'll go ahead and defer to you, Tracy. Are there any updates or things that you would like to pass along from a digital transformation subcommittee?
Yeah, a quick slide so people have it in their materials, but not intending to walk through it. And I would say at the outset, less so in my case, not wanting to chair anymore, and more recognizing that change is good for all organizations. So looking forward and really appreciating Joe's the different approach she brings to this committee. As you can see, without even going into any of the words on the slide, there are lots of them. So the key takeaway is that there's been fantastic progress. And great updates that we've received as a digital transformation committee, along what we've described in the past as the three activities that we try to support. One is tracking progress on the roadmap elements, a lot of work on digital identity working group getting moving, and North Carolina ID to use that identification system for the constituent engagement platform. Other things here, we mapping personas as it relates to NC.gov, and this becomes important. I think some of these pieces downstream with some of the things we heard earlier from Cherie. How do we make sure that as we have personas, those map against the information privacy and otherwise? really trying to help make the case for digital transformation, including especially governance aspects, the work around decision making for the moving forward plans with the chatbot and how we operate that serves as a pilot in some regard for how we think across agencies about other programs and governance of those. And then the Ensure statewide, really continuing our work with DMV and the Secretary of State. A lot of progress on the Pay It platform as a continuing opportunity for statewide and agency-wide payment solutions, including toward voter registration options and otherwise other parts of the Pay It platform. As you can see in red below each of the categories, we reference some of the things that are coming and sort of in the queue. So on the statewide roadmap, we've got the MyDMV portal and its movement over there, and a lot of new functionality that's expected to unleash, so to speak, as early as this summer. And in the other categories as well, have noted what are the next things sort of queued up in those areas. So didn't want to say a whole lot on this one, but wanted the amount of text on this slide to really convey and reassure everyone involved that there's great progress being made within DIT and other agencies across the board on digital transformation. That's it for my report, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, ma'am. Keith, any updates for cyber?
Yeah, so this will be my first update and most definitely my briefest. So, but just a quick shout out to Jeff. I think he did a great job leading this committee over the last year. I think he's positioned us really well. I look forward to forwarding his agenda that was set forth last year. We have not met in January, February, so we do as a committee plan to reconvene in April. I look forward to updating the committee. But you know, I think we're well positioned to advance some really cool things. So I look forward to it.
Okay, Jeff, give you a chance for any former chair comments.
Well, same as Tracy, I think it's good exercise to rotate the chairs, get different perspective. We're in a little bit of a unique position now that we've been able to twist Keith's arm, that we have a past state CIO running this. So we are in excellent hands. And I just wanted to share the reason I was late. I spent an hour with the senior finance chair in the House, Representative Bradford, dealing with some of the topics we talked about the other day, Jim. So we'll follow back up in the beginning of the week.
Okay, thank you. And again, Tracy, Jeff, thank you for your willingness to have served the past year, and look forward to your continued contributions. And then Keith and of course, Joe, thank you for agreeing to come on board, and look forward to working with you here over the next year as we continue to move forward. We'll go ahead and just talk real briefly about, not necessarily with the state budget for IT, but basically DIT's budget. So do we have the slide deck for that? Okay, thank you. So, you know, we went through the budget expansion process, and we asked for a lot of things. And as everyone knows, in the budgeting process, you don't necessarily get everything you want, but we did come out fairly decent, and I'm quite pleased with where we landed overall as an agency in our budget request. What you can see there is we do have expense requests totaling slightly over $100 million. And to put those numbers in probably some kind of better idea of how to understand them, because numbers are numbers. When we look at fiscal year 23-24 and the governor's recommended budget, DIT would see a 94% increase above our normal base budget. And in fiscal year 24-25, that would be a 42% over our normal base budget. So while we may not have gotten everything that we would have liked to have gotten, and we had passionately lobbied for, as Director Walker knows, we still came out pretty good overall in the budget process as far as what the governor's budget that was sent over to the General Assembly. A couple of things we want to call out is we did get the approval in the governor's recommended budget for 20 full-time employees in addition to current numbers. 12 of them are focused on the cybersecurity area. And one of the areas that we are looking at is our Security Operations Center and what should we or could we be doing differently than possibly what we're doing today. As we talked about the formation of the Office of Privacy and Data Protection, Cherie is a tremendous one-person office at the moment. She needs some assistance, and we were able to solicit 5 additional positions to help round out that office and the great work that's going on there. From an internal auditor perspective, we learned through the course of the different processes that we were a little under what the recommended staffing level was for our internal audit. We have a phenomenal internal audit director and team here. We want to make sure that we're doing the right things and allowing him to meet his professional standards and mandates. So there's an additional 2 staff positions that are being targeted for our internal auditor's role to continue to do the great work they're doing here in the agency. And we really do value their input and their observations and proposed corrective actions. And then lastly, we do have a position for the Government Data Analytics Center as well. Next slide. What you're going to see for the most part is a significant investment in cybersecurity and privacy. And so what you see there is, if you remember, in November of 21, the budget that Governor Cooper signed then was the first time that DIT ever received recurring funding, and we received $7.5 million. And while we're very appreciative of the legislature's agreement to fund us at a $7.5 million recurring funding level, cybersecurity in today's world, $7.5 million is woefully inadequate. And so we're pleased to see that the governor has recognized the necessary investments that are needed for cybersecurity to continue to make North Carolina a national leader and to shore up some of our defenses here within the state. A significant investment in cybersecurity and privacy. You can kind of see what those numbers look like. We have a significant number of projects that we are looking to get underway. We've done some things in the last 12 months that need to be sustained and continue to move forward. Things that we're doing at an enterprise level that benefits all agencies, as opposed to having each agency try to do the same thing a multiplicity of times. That does not get us to a good return on investment on our taxpayer dollars. So we're proposing is allow us to do certain things at an enterprise level, and we can get a better return on investment. And fund us to do that, so we're not looking at a cost recovery model. As many of you know, I've been trying to look at ways to get this agency out of a cost recovery model process. I think it's becoming more and more difficult to manage that. There's more and more unknowns that continues to occur in the IT industry, the personnel challenges that we have as well. And then likewise, as we move to the cloud, what we want to make sure of is that certain services, as we're looking to retire, that the last person consuming that service is not stuck holding the proverbial bag. That's not fair to that agency. So we got to do this in a manner that does not create unfunded mandates for our agency partners and our consumers out across the state of North Carolina. That does not mean that we won't make some mistakes, and probably have made some mistakes, and we're going to go back and make sure that we're doing the right things to fix those. But at the same time, as many of you know, on cybersecurity, the bad actor only has to be right once. We have to be right all the time. And that's an awesome responsibility to have. And we do have a dedicated workforce that's looking at doing that. Some of this may involve some selective outsourcing of certain functions as well. So we are very much interested in looking at some managed service provider models. This is not necessarily that we would be doing everything in-house with state staff. We have to recognize the fact that we do have workforce challenges here in the state, and especially in the cybersecurity arena. As many of you know, I think NC Tech Association is still indicating over 21,000 jobs available in North Carolina. It's hard for us to compete with the private sector, despite some of the things that the governor is trying to do to help offset some of those concerns and allowing us maybe to get to a younger generation workforce a lot quicker. To get them exposed to what we're doing in the state and to enable their education and their opportunities to grow and expand their skill sets. But at the same time, that's going to take some time as well. So we're looking at all kinds of different alternatives. We're trying to get some things done preemptively. By that, I mean, there's a lot of precursory activities that need to occur before we're able to get to a mode of execution. We're really working extremely hard to do those cursory activities now, in the event that when the budget does get passed and is signed, that we're able to move somewhat quickly into an execution mode to be able to go ahead and execute on the plan that we have in front of us. You'll see some things as well. Cherie talked about data classification, data inventory. That is something that's critical. If you don't know what you have, it's very hard to manage it. So as we're beginning to learn more and more about what data, where is our data, what is the categorization of that data, more importantly, what's the classification of that data, how do we need to go and secure that data? This is where our privacy officer, our cyber office, our chief data officer, that triangle there, that's that foundation of data governance, information governance, as Cherie talked about, bringing these things together in a very tangible format so we can be better positioned and again, continue to elevate the cybersecurity posture of the state. Next slide. As well as you heard us talk before, broadband, Governor made that very clear 2 years ago when I came to the state of North Carolina. Broadband was my #1 priority, followed by a very close second, cyber. It sounds like I'm pushing cyber off. I'm not, but we do all recognize the impact that broadband has in the state of North Carolina as the state continues to grow. I think Director Walker indicated in some of her comments in the budget briefing that we're growing somewhere around 130,000, 150,000 monthly, somewhere in there on a population growth. We know that the largest age group that is growing or will be growing projected wise in North Carolina is 65 and older. That population is moving away from the urban areas, moving out more into the suburban rural areas of the state. And that's going to start creating some stressors for us if it's not already. And as much as Secretary Boyette and our colleagues at DOT are working extremely hard at building out, I'll call it the concrete infrastructure, we need to be as diligent and as hardworking to build out that digital infrastructure so everyone can remain connected and be an active participant here on the digital highway in North Carolina. It's very hard for us to do digital transformation if 10%, 15% of our state's population is lacking connectivity to high-speed quality internet service. We cannot afford to continue to have that digital divide, and so we need to make sure that we're addressing that as well. What you see here is some of the things that the broadband office needs as well. I hate the use where it says broadband administration. That is not necessarily increasing staff. That is really around, as you see there, really we're trying to get to those community-based digital literacy programs. We're trying to get to the point of educating North Carolinians as you are getting connected. We don't want you to become victims of cyber fraud or identity theft or those kind of things because you clicked on something that you shouldn't have as well. So we want to make sure that we're trying to give that comprehensive overview and making sure that North Carolinians are as protected as best possible while they're engaging on the digital highway. Next slide. Okay, the other thing, just from an IT aspect, there are a number of IT projects that were included in the governor's recommended budget across the cabinet agencies. What you're going to see is those kind of being identified in the IT reserve. And so there's additional $180 million of critical replacement IT project. We have a lot of mission critical applications in the state of North Carolina that are not being kept to pace with where they need to be from a technological aspect. By that, I mean, it's very easy for us to upgrade servers and infrastructure, but if we're upgrading infrastructure and it breaks an application, that's not a good outcome. Applications need to be kept current to be able to consume the necessary infrastructure for their ability to run. We know we have a legacy portfolio here in North Carolina. I think the governor's budget submission is trying to address some of that. Obviously, we can't do it all at one shot, but there are a number of critical applications that have been identified and put into the critical or into the IT reserve fund that will enable us to start chipping away at that in a methodical manner. Obviously, we would like to move to the cloud as much as possible. We need to move to the cloud as we're doing application modernization and doing it in a way that allows the application to take advantage of what the cloud has to offer. What we're not looking to do in North Carolina is do a lift and shift to the cloud, because at the end of the day, a bad application on-prem is a bad application in the cloud. And probably in some cases, it's going to cost us more money to have it run in the cloud. So we want to make sure we're doing this the right way, and we're at the forefront thinking about the North Carolinian and what's in the best return on investment for a North Carolinian in these cases. The other one there, you see the ERP planning. The other one too is the state's tax administration. I know Secretary Penny is very excited about this opportunity, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but that project is in there as well. Next slide. I think that's it for that, right? Okay. Hopefully there's not any questions on that. I know Director Walker's on the line, and I want to thank Director Walker for working with us and her team working with us. We had a phenomenal partnership and collaboration. I know we had a third subcommittee, if you will, that Sarah Porper kind of worked with, and Jonathan Meyer from OSBM. I thought that was an awesome opportunity, starting to showcase how we can come together, start looking at some of these expansion project requests as it relates to IT, and start doing some analysis across those. So I do want to thank Director Walker and her team at OSBM for being very collaborative partners with us. And then also for the folks on that subcommittee working with Sarah and Jonathan to help identify what some of the things are that we should be looking at from our criteria aspect. Hopefully we will continue to learn from this. We'll continue to evolve in that area, and we'll continue to mature and be able to do a little bit more over the next upcoming budget processes. So with that, I will turn it back over to, I think, Julie. And we want to talk a little bit about what we want to look at for this year. You know, we have an exciting year coming up. There's some, oh, Tracy, you got some question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just real quick, not so much a question as a suggestion, just from the standpoint of governance and what you're seeking to do, Jim. Just wondering whether as you see a big bogey out there, like 180 million, right, for all the enterprise, right, upgrades and changes, whether that begs the question of the value or advisability of having another formal subcommittee, or if, you know, digital transformation has set its roadmap and you need a different one instead of that that's focused on some of the administrative systems reforms. I just am aware that in the life of CIOs, those are huge projects, and those can draw lots of criticism and critique about how they're unfolded, rightly or wrongly. And so I just wonder whether this board might be more helpful in that process. So not so much a question as a idea maybe to think about or consider.
No, I appreciate the comment, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, we jokingly say at the national level, CIO stands for career is over. Yet some of these projects are career enders in many cases, because we all know the bigger the project and the more money that's associated with it could result in some outcomes. I remember during my time out in the state of Washington, I had a state senator look at me and say, if you have a 10% cost overrun on that ERP project, I could fund every child or a child who's in a child welfare program to go to a 4-year school. That was how significant that was, and we kept that at heart, right? I mean, it was like that is something that when we're looking at competing dollars for a myriad of social human programs, whatever the case may be. What you will see in there is we were very purposeful in not identifying projects and a dollar amount associated with the project. We also took a very thoughtful approach of how we might go about it. So obviously, you might look at a large, let's just say $100 million project, just for the sake of argument. How do we do that in phases where we can fund a phase, get that phase to completion, then enable funding for the next phase, get that to completion, enable the funding for the next phase, get that to completion. So trying to be very methodic, thoughtful, but also not trying to be a hindrance or an obstacle from an agency trying to get the necessary work done. But like I said, I think our colleagues in OSBM were very much on point in looking at some of these things. And again, I'm just happy that we got the projects identified. That by no means is an exclusive list. This is just a list that made the first cut, if you will, to get in the governor's recommended budget. But we will, again, we have to wait and see what the General Assembly proposes back and what comes in an ultimate budget. And then we may need to come back and redirect. And maybe that's where we can engage our board members, and maybe through another subcommittee, and do maybe a little different analysis once we actually see what dollars might be appropriated or allocated for some of these efforts. Director Walker, do you want to add anything there? I'll give you the opportunity.
Sure. No, Jim, I think you've summed it up really well. We were very intentional about not putting dollar amounts on these projects. We all know what happens when we do that. So that is something we, we all hope carries through with the General Assembly. And I've talked with some of the appropriations chairs about that, about having it in a reserve. That said, it's actually, there's a couple provisions in the governor's budget that are relevant, I think. One is that reserve would be governed at the Office of State Budget and Management, my office, with a consultation to the state CIO. So, us, Jim and I working closely together to see where projects are and which are ready to go, and to evaluate the funding level needed. And then also for the large ERP 2.0, as well as for the tax system, there is a provision in there about a governing executive committee, similar to how we've been doing in CFS. So it would have the chair of that department, the state CIO, and the state budget director on an exec committee, and then directs them to have working committees. And that may be, Jim, where we could integrate some folks from this board into some of those working committees. So we are concerned with oversight, and it was definitely included in the consideration. So. But no, appreciate everyone's support. And Jim, we don't grow quite as quickly. It's 130,000 people a year. So,
okay.
But yeah.
I thought you said monthly. I'm sorry.
We really have some struggles then, but yeah, no, 130,000 a year. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually since 2020, then that means we were what, almost 400,000 already growth for, yeah.
That's right, and okay. 11 million by 2025. So.
Yep. Okay, Jeff, question, sir?
Yeah, more again, like Tracy, a comment. I think we can learn from history so we don't repeat it, but you could use 3 projects to look at going forward with funding. One is NC Tracks, for those that have been around it long enough. Also TIMS, the first iteration when we did the tax information management system. And then obviously the whole ERP 1.0 funding process to look at. And I know there's been discussions we have maybe in place kind of a enterprise program management office, but at what project levels do you implement that? But it's really 3 main components. One is how we're going to fund these and work with the legislature. The second is, which is something I think we need, and I know there's been some thought about doing it, but really deep content expertise around the whole contracting process, because we tend to get exposed on the state level and we get taken advantage of by the vendors on past contracts. And then the third piece, which ties in with the program management office, which I don't think we've seen done on large, and it really needs to only apply to very large IT projects. There's no informal quality assurance reviews done either internally, and oftentimes, and when I say contract, under NC Tracks, we tried to get the vendor, and I won't mention who at the time, the ability to review their internal QA teams, because all the large vendors do that. They wouldn't share the information. And they said contractually we're not obligated to, because they thought we would hold them hostage, if you will, or and that's not the intent. The intent's to learn, because they have insight through their external QA teams, and we should be doing the same thing. So just those areas are things, depending, Christine, working with you guys and also with DIT, is so we've got better communications with the legislature on funding and also keeping projects from going off the rail.
Yeah, and again, I think our focus is keeping the project from going off the rail and starting to see the proverbial cost overruns. And so I'm a big fan of IV&V. And I think actually there's a requirement from the federal, if there's federal dollars involved. And I know in the human services days, we were required to do IV&V QA. You had an independent entity that was in there assessing the project and actually reporting to the executive committee or the steering committee of the effort separately from the vendor that was the SI, whatever you want to call it, on the status of that. And if there, those notes were being shared with CMS here as well. So even if you look at our Medicaid enterprise work that's underway, PCG, as an example, is the IVMV vendor, and providing reports not only to my office, Secretary Kinsley, but they're also going to CMS as well. So you kind of get that. So I think we have some models that we can do. What's exciting is that we're working very collaboratively here now, and taking a look at, again, we want to get to the best outcome. We want to make sure we're doing at the most effective price point, and we want to make sure that we're keeping projects on the rails, not necessarily watching them come off that's probably a bad analogy now with the train accidents that are out there, but you get my point. Okay. Thank you, Kristen, very much. And I know you got to run. It's a busy time of the year for you. So thank you for popping in and taking some time with us. As we move forward, again, like I said, looking at this upcoming year, I've asked Julie to kind of lead us through a facilitated discussion of what are the things that we should be looking at, considering for the upcoming year. What are the activities that the board would like to engage in? And let's just get those ideas captured, and we'll hopefully be able to build some things off of those ideas, and then we can talk about them at a latter meeting, or maybe we can go ahead and do some things off cycle and create some subcommittees, whatever the case may be, to continue to move forward with those agendas. So, Julie, I'll turn it over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm doing this in part so Secretary Weaver can participate, as he's a member of the board as well. We've got some questions up on the screen just to prompt your thinking, and want to make sure that this board is doing what you want it to do. So some of the questions: have your priorities shifted for the two committees that we have, the Cybersecurity, Privacy, and the Digital Transformation Committee? When you all spoke in December, I think the response then was, no, we want those two committees to stay on their same track, but want to open that up again. A question that the members have said many times is, how can we support DIT and technology infrastructure throughout the state? So if you have comments on that. We knew after the summary of the budget that you might have some questions or comments that might impact your interests and priorities. So I've captured the first one. Should we have a subcommittee to review those reserve projects? And then, are there any new priorities for you as members of the IT Strategy Board? So would open it up to members if anyone has thoughts or input about your priorities moving forward.
The silence is deafening. I'm not sure it qualifies for this, Julie. I'm going to just throw a discussion starter out there. As we look at the continued focus on our workforce challenges and the creation of a cyber talent pipeline here for the state of North Carolina, I know we have the Carolina Cyber Network that's doing some phenomenal stuff. But what I don't know is how many of those graduates or are individuals getting certifications are actually remaining and engaged in the state. Are we losing people to outside? Again, I go back to the comment, like the federal government. Are we losing folks to the federal government or other opportunities? Are we able to, what portion of this talent that we're working very diligently to get made available to us is remaining in state and working for in-state private sector entities or for local government, or just say public sector? Is that something where I'm not sure I'm framing that correctly, but it's just something I'm curious about, and I don't know if any others got any thoughts on that.
Guess a little bit of a riff on that, not explicitly addressing it, Jim, but I wonder whether combining a few of these, right? How could members help DIT, and what are the priorities? Do we have an approach that aims at dashboards or KPIs for some of these priorities that could be shared with the ITSB, and then we can help to become agents of that information? I'm thinking of Matt's fantastic presentation, and how we could see over time kind of the winnowing and reducing of the number of households and where we are on targets. Likewise, when we heard from Cherie about privacy, right? How we're marching those down and what the universe of need looks like relative to the progress we're continuing to make. Because I know it can be thankless to never be able to get everything done, but if people can see the progress, that helps in some ways.
Okay. Again, I love metrics. My staff here know that. And they're always afraid to show me number because for some reason numbers stick in my mind and I remember that number. So I get exactly what you're saying, Tracy. And I guess it's not necessarily cyber. And I should have mentioned this earlier, beginning of the month, we working with the Hunt Institute, the Hunt Institute actually did the hard work, but we were there supporting it, was on the second annual Datathon. We had 4 high school teams competing this year, which was phenomenal to see and witness. And the first high school team that presented their findings of their analysis they started off by saying, we use ChatGPT to cleanse our data. And I'm like, what? And I'm like freaking out, right? And excitement. And then there's others who are focused on the security side. It's like, oh my God, it's just the difference there. But we do have some extremely talented kids coming up that are interested. In fact, one handed his resume over to my HR director right there at the Datathon. So again, I think there's opportunities that we can get these kids engaged a little bit differently, but it's not just cyber. We got data. And then, how do we start working more at the high school level to help them understand that they can be influencers on how policy decisions are derived or arrived at. And they don't necessarily have to get locked in. There was 2 teams from Cary Academy that I was discussing with, and I asked them, I said, have any of you guys thought about cyber? And they're looking like, why would I do cyber? Well, data analysis, threat intelligence, threat analysis, and I started just rattling off a whole bunch of things. So I'm hoping that there's an opportunity where we're going to see some more participants coming into Cyber Start America type stuff, and getting them exposed. But we don't want kids to get pigeonholed, but we also want to try to get them exposed to a bunch of things. And then, as you've all heard me talk about, we seem to be losing out on the east and west parts of our state. A lot of good stuff is going on between Raleigh and Charlotte. We have to also make sure we're getting a little bit more inclusive of the entire state for some of these opportunities. And maybe it's how we go about doing it. Like one of the things we possibly talked about at the Datathon, and it makes us some challenges logistically, but maybe we have regional datathons and we bring the winners of the regional datathons into Raleigh for a state competition then, or something like that, so we can try to get different exposure out there across the entire state. And because I'm sure there's kids out there that are interested in it and we're just missing them. And again, I don't know if that helps us or not, but workforce is going to be one of our ongoing challenges here. And it's just something, if this team can help us in any way, shape, or fashion, I just would love to have a conversation around that. Okay, and I'm going to quit talking. Others, please.
Yeah, other board members, we'd love to hear from you about your priorities, the direction you want this board to do, how you can jump in, or even just feedback, keep on the same trajectory as we have it.
Hey there, Secretary Weaver. This is Deontay from the North Carolina
Hi.
Community College side, specific to kind of the workforce initiatives that you were mentioning. I'm chatting with one of our chief strategy officers right now. We can work with our partners at Commerce to provide info pertaining to credentialed college students and graduates to this board. I know one of the points of emphasis that you mentioned as well was high school students, but that is something that's near and dear to our heart, is how we matriculate students with credentials to our workforce. We've been able to consume our own lunch, if you will, at the North Carolina Community College System office by being able to onboard students into our IT division as well. But that is something that we can report back to this group on, is what that looks like from a community college perspective.
Okay, thank you. By the way, if you're not checking the chat, Carol Burrows, our Chief Data Officer, put the YouTube link out there for the Datathon presentations. So if anyone's interested in seeing what the 4 high school teams focused on, and then the post-secondary teams focused on, it's quite interesting.
Input from other board members? Jeff?
Hey, Julie, let me go. I'll just, since everybody's kind of being quiet, I was hoping
I was
to be
surprised
quiet.
you were, Jeff. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to sit on my hands and be quiet. I think there's a lot of things. One, the continue.
Oh no, we lost him at the apex of his thought.
With identifications, if you,
Hey Jeff, you're cutting in and out
so
on us.
dealing
So
with that.
Jeff, you're cutting in and out on us, so we may not be getting everything you're talking about or discussing, sir.
All right, are you hearing me better now or not?
Yes.
Okay, I was just going to say the other side is the whole educational pathways is taking it to the next level, which is what Keith and Patrick have focused on both at the university level and at the community college. But there's a number of other things I think responsibility as an oversight board, and maybe it's setting up time to do that, but it's reviewing the strategic business plan, reviewing the priorities for the department, how we can advance those. It's looking at how do we establish better communications, through Monica and others for the communication back to the legislature. So it's not just a report status, once a session, but it's really ongoing dialogue. So we're not fighting the battle of partially funding the ERP project steps rather than them understanding the whole commitment that's required once you start. I don't know how we work on communicating to us as an oversight board the status of major projects, because you've got a tremendous amount of expertise and a number of CIOs that can help as kind of that tier of first level quality assurance and oversight. There's the whole issue that I think needs to be addressed. There's just a bunch of things we need to prioritize these, obviously, but the whole cross-departmental IT kind of coordination, collaboration of DIT across, not just being the infrastructure and the garden hose and the pipes, but we've got initiatives where we get duplicative efforts, duplicative funding of like things going on across agencies and departments. How do we streamline that? We've got, I think, as you talk, it's things I don't think we've done a good job as, and this is goes back. I mean, you could.
Jeff, we're losing you again.
Protect.
Yeah, as Tina said, we got to get broadband.
Okay, I'm sorry.
America.
Is that?
You're back.
Yeah,
Okay.
broadband, but I'm talking about just documenting the whole enterprise architecture of this. What are we doing in that prepping for that next future? Because I know RPAs are a big deal. The whole robotics process automation. Where can we leverage that to reduce costs and create efficiencies? That's a humongous opportunity for us to lever. And then the last one is the simple stuff that where can we apply automation? This is going to sound strange, but the country of Estonia, which is borders Russia, borders Sweden, it communicates itself as the most technically advanced country on the planet. Why is North Carolina not the most technically advanced state in the United States? And there's things to automate and reducing paper, wet signatures, fundamental things. While we're doing some of the advanced things, there's some basic blocking and tackling that would have tremendous bit for the state and for citizens and businesses. And that's something I think our group board, because of the breadth, needs to help prioritize and say these are areas that maybe we should look at. Now, obviously, getting resource commitments, funding become important, and whether that fits into DIT's priorities is important. But there's just a host of things that I think we could have a discussion to help prioritize besides just the two fundamental things that we've started, which are important. Cyber and digital transformation need to continue. So just some thoughts.
Appreciate that. And, again, it's funny you bring up Estonia, because I don't think Estonia has the legacy baggage that it had to carry forward. So we got to do things a lot more creatively up front. I remember at the turn of the century, yes, back then, we were there was a gentleman from the United Nations that was at a discussion we were having, and his comment was around communications and basically how third world nations were now leapfrogging modern industrial nations because they did not have all the baggage to bring forward with them from a telecommunications aspect. They were already able to go to newer technologies just like that. And so it's difficult. That's our challenge here. It's difficult for us to continue forward. I philosophically, I support everything you said, Jeff. No disagreement. The one thing that we just got to be careful about is technology does not drive business. Business drives technology. And I just want to make sure that this is done in a manner, or we convey it in a manner that allows the business, because a lot of these cases for the technology to be effective and some of the things you've talked about, there has to be some business process reengineering that needs to occur as well. And that goes with education and a bunch of other things. So again, appreciate the comments and wholehearted agreement on them. I'm just thankful you referred to us as a garden hose and not the plumbing and the toilet. Thank you. Tracy, you've been patiently waiting.
No worries. I talked already enough in the earlier part of the meeting. I just was reflecting on several of the comments here, this idea of continuing the cyber security and cyber education pathways.
Mm-hmm.
The comments you made earlier, Jim, about I think it was like 18% vacancy rate that you're having in IT, and some of what Dante was reflecting on in terms of roles of community colleges. And I just wonder whether there isn't or maybe shouldn't be some kind of a DIT / education broadly, right? Committee or group to think about how we would design and take advantage of the funnel, right? To have in DIT or in other agencies in the IT space, whether they're internships or fellowships or chances for, community college or other college students or even high school students to start to get involved in programs and projects and gain experience. And those might be something you could formalize, right, through some kind of a committee structure or otherwise. Next week, we have something we call Data Fest at Duke, and it's just run by one of our statistical faculty, and it involves about 200 people, students. Only about half are from Duke, and the other half are from other universities. But again, it's not formalized in any way to take advantage of the state and perhaps the breadth of connections that you all have or that Dante has or that others have to get broader participation in those. So I just wonder whether we're missing an opportunity given how acute the challenge of staffing is, and whether some of the raw ingredients are here or could be put together to help with that.
Thanks,
No,
Tracy.
yeah, very much appreciate that. And again, that's kind of why we're here, at least trying within the agency to do those internships and those associate programs to try to bring to start making those opportunities available for some to come in. Dr. Sorellis down in Fayetteville Tech, I know as they're going through as part of the CCN, as they're going through their training, I think there's opportunities where we can provide them more real world data that's more pertinent to what's going on to enable them. The question then becomes, as a cyber incident occurs in the state and the Joint Cyber Task Force is engaging in that opportunity, is there any way that we can bring some of these students along in that incident response? You know, what are the legal issues we have to overcome, if any? So they can start getting that real world experience of, hey, you're in an incident response opportunity. This is what it kind of looks like, because it's hard to gain that in the classroom. You know, when you're sitting across the table from someone who's just been basically burned to the ground because of a ransomware attack, and you know, I've seen that deer in the headlight look already from other past locations. You know, they don't know what to do next. They just know, you know, critical services aren't being done, and they kind of need that, you know, that coaching and help to get them back up and getting them recovered. I think that's the part that's invaluable. We can teach all the technical skills. We also got to be able to teach somehow, let them learn those soft skills when they're out there and engaged in those types of environments. But yeah, very much agree with that. And if you have any information on your data, what you call it, data, I don't want to use the word datathon, but your data opportunity.
No, Data Fest. Yeah,
Data Fest.
Is what
Yeah, I think Carol Burrows is online. If you can throw it in the chat there, I think that's something we would like to, maybe if we could just come out and listen or watch, because again, we're trying to look at how can we, we're doing some phenomenal work with the Hunt Institute, and a lot of that is still looking at analysis as to how do we get to more successful educational outcomes here in the state of North Carolina. There might be some other topics, or there might be some other opportunities where we could do some more. So thank you for that.
Other board members, Keith Briggs, Keith Werner, Pamela Cashwell, Kristen Walker, anyone else have comments to share for your priorities?
And I might add, Keith Briggs is our Director of Enterprise Architecture, and he's also dual-hatted as of tomorrow, going to fill in as our interim State Chief Risk Officer until we get a permanent hire on board. So Keith's gonna need to be at the Irish pub this weekend.
That dual hat is that green thing behind me. So Julie, just to answer your question, I mean, one of the things that I will also say, and this is maybe a little bit more of a what's in it for me or selfish perspective. When we talk about like application modernization, but even just modernization in its relationship to what the ITSB can help us serve, you know, we're looking at things like updating our cloud strategy and looking at, you know, hosting models and things like that. So when we're involved in these type of discussions, we always have to look back at what statutes and legislature exists that are oriented towards the way we used to do things, and then how do we modernize and update them to be supportive of, you know, our future initiatives, right? And it isn't digital transformation, but it is transformation of services that I'd like to call out maybe.
Thanks. Ms. Cashwell?
Yes. Hey, good morning, everybody. So I think the key things for our department that I'm working closely with our new CIO, thank you, Secretary Weaver, super excited to have our new CIO fully in place.
Yep.
Relates to security, because we have not had a dedicated security person on my team. We are supported. We're one of the agencies that is supported by DIT. And I think that that is an area of concern for our department. And then the second thing would just be ensuring that all of our applications that have to be tied to the new state's financial backbone, it's no longer called that, but the new financial system, that integration occurs with all of the proper safety and security, you know, wraparound. Sorry, I don't know all the technological terms for doing that connectivity, but I feel good about it in terms of our CIO has been working really, really well to ensure that we are tracking all of our systems that will be connected, and the Office of State Controller they have been doing a really good job with us. But I know for us, that's a major project this year because we have a number of systems that will have to be integrated into that.
Thank you. Any other priorities or feedback from the board members to make sure that the board is working in the direction you want it to be working in? Secretary Weaver, I think we've left a long enough pregnant pause to.
Okay. Well, then we'll wrap up this topic item. Thank you, everybody, for your comments, thoughts, and the dialogue. And very much appreciate it. We'll move on then, just to invite any board members. Is there any other business that anyone would like to bring up or discuss or have consideration for a future topic on? Okay, I think that was enough of a dramatic pause for that one. So then we'll go ahead then and move to adjournment. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating. Hopefully we get everybody out before the games start for March Madness here on Friday. I think the state fans, you play at 4 o'clock today. So good luck there to the end to the Wolfpack. And Duke's got a game tomorrow against the 4 seed. So thank you very much. Happy March Madness. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you again very much. And we'll be talking at our next quarterly meeting, which is when, Julie? I don't have that tidbit in front of me. Thank you. June 16th. Okay. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. We'll consider this adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.